Good morning, everyone. It's my honor to welcome and thank all of you for coming to the Elmhurst College Governmental Forum, an event which over 7 iterations has become a cornerstone, I think, of our public programming here, and I hope a source of stimulus and enlightenment to all of you. As many of you know, at Elmhurst, we're committed to fostering civic engagement among our students, our faculty, and the larger community. We do so not as an incident to our educational mission, but because we believe private colleges like ours have an obligation to perform public duties through the sharing of knowledge and the transformative power of dialogue. We're literally all in this together. So each year we welcome thousands of people to our campus to hear and to respond to some of the country's most thought-provoking discussions. Governor Edgar, in fact, has said that, quote, Elmhurst College has emerged as a leader among the institutions of higher learning in Illinois for its determined focus on civic engagement and service to the community, unquote. And we're truly honored by that recognition. In June, we launched Fixing Illinois, a Great State's Problems and Promise, with the goal of starting an ongoing discussion about the challenges that Illinois faces and empowering citizens to help address those challenges and move our state forward. Today, we come together for the same goal, to wrestle with the fundamental economic, social, and political problems that beset us. Beset us, but do not hobble us. For we have with us this morning an array of panelists whose collective experience and insight may prove a catalyst for the change I think we so desperately seek. To introduce our panelists and the elected officials who've joined us today, it's my pleasure to bring back to the podium my Special Assistant for Government and Community Relations, Lee Daniels, whose long career in the State House of Representatives, including distinguished service as the Speaker of the House, has earned him, I think, the abiding respect of the state and, yes, certainly of Elmhurst College and myself. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Lee Daniels.
Thank you, President Ray, and thank you for being here today and for leading our institution. No organization like this, particularly at this time of the election season, would be appropriate if we didn't recognize some of our elected officials. There are many throughout the audience today. Obviously, I'm going to miss somebody, but we'll call for a general standing. So please join me in recognizing the Senate Republican leader, Christine Rodonio. We have many Senate and House members here today, so those of you that are in the Senate and House, please rise so we could say thank you to you as well. I know Chairman Dan Cronin was scheduled to be here today. I know his busy schedule sometimes takes him away, but we have many county board members and Forest Preserve commissioners and judges of the Circuit Court. Please stand and be recognized for us. We have the Mayor of Elmhurst here, Steve Morley, who of course is the mayor of our community, and many mayors and public officials in the municipal and city level throughout our DuPage County and related area. Please stand to say hello to us. Now, all candidates for office, wherever you may be, please stand so we can thank you for your effort to be part of our public campaign. And of course, we always want to thank you very much for your service to our communities and our state. And more than ever, we need your leadership. So please, please, with vision and determination, help us get out of the problems we face in this state. So thank you for your service. Once again, I would like to thank you for attending the 7th Annual Elmhurst College Governmental Forum. As you can tell from our title, Illinois' Reckoning, Solving the Problems, Fulfilling the Promise, we at Elmhurst College have taken a lead role in addressing issues and problems facing the state of Illinois. We make no judgment on individual performance or lack thereof, but know that an engaged and educated citizenry is essential to solving problems and moving our state forward to fulfill its promise. Along that line, for several months, we sponsored a series of lectures by state and local decision makers entitled Fixing Illinois. At the time, all announced candidates for governor were invited, along with state and local leaders. The series was enlightening. Each speaker shared with us their views on how this great state can move forward. Some views were controversial and difficult, but all were meant to address our numerous problems and, yes, seek a solution. At the close of each lecture, each speaker answered questions from the audience. Today's panel, led by distinguished and accomplished leaders within our state, is a continuation of our Fixing Illinois series. It promises to be engaging, interesting, thought-provoking, and challenging. Are you up to the task of being part of the solution to our state's fiscal and economic woes? By being here today, you have answered that question in the affirmative. When you leave, it is our hope that you will be part of the solution and help fulfill the promise of our great state. We have a diverse, geographically and mineral-rich state with many accomplished and capable leaders. They need our assistance. We will be there for them, but they need to be there for us and the future of Illinois and its great promise. Once again, thank you for coming today. Now I would like to take this opportunity to welcome and to introduce our panel. So please join me in welcoming our panel for Illinois' Reckoning, Solving the Problems, Fulfilling the Promise. A complete bio of each panelist is in your program for you to review and to look at. Todd Miles. Whoops, I was supposed to introduce Rob first. There you go. Mr. President, I admit the mistake. All right. Rob Kniffer Jr. Rob, senior partner in one of the world's most prominent law firms. Having grown up in Elmhurst, he and his wife live in Hinsdale. Amongst his many accomplishments include serving on the Board of Trustees at Elmhurst College, Adler Planetarium, and the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce. Please welcome Rob Kniffer. Todd Miles. Todd's long and distinguished career includes service to the people of Illinois and many educational and philanthropic organizations. He is well known in financial circles and brings to our panel a depth of knowledge in financial matters. Todd Miles. Ty Fahner, a friend and professional colleague of many world leaders. Ty has been recognized on numerous occasions as one of our state's most accomplished citizens in law and government. The former Attorney General of Illinois and managing partner of the worldwide law firm Mayer Brown, Ty is often referred to as one of Illinois' most powerful men. Ty led the charge for the successful pension reform legislation here in Illinois. Ty Fahner. Mary Ann Ahern. Truly a force in the state and local news arena. Mary Ann has covered major political events ranging from presidential campaigns to mayoral elections. She will bring to the panel an experienced insight into the problems and solutions for Illinois. Welcome, Mary Ann Ahern. Bruce Dold. Covering city, state, and national politics, Bruce manages the insightful examination into the governance and operation of Chicago, Illinois, and the country. His leadership has resulted in the Chicago Tribune receiving numerous awards for its in-depth analysis of issues facing Illinois, while at the same time seeking solutions to its challenges. Bruce will lend a knowledgeable and experienced voice to our panel discussion. Bruce Dold. And now, the longest-serving governor in the history of the state of Illinois. During his record-setting 14 years as Illinois governor, I had the pleasure of working with him in my role as a member of the Illinois General Assembly. Hardworking, visionary, intelligent, and committed to excellence were only a few of the words used to describe our moderator for today's event. Big Jim has also been recognized as one of the nation's most influential lawyers. Governor Thompson never stopped thinking about the best interests of the people of Illinois and ways to move our state forward in a positive fashion. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the 37th and longest-serving governor of Illinois, Big Jim Thompson. This is our panel. Governor, it's now yours.
Lee, thank you. Every time I hear an introduction by Lee of my years of service, there's always this sigh after the phrase, the longest serving governor of Illinois. Probably thinking back to the days when I was persistently at his door seeking a tax increase or some other kind of legislative action that he wasn't necessarily on board with at the beginning, but came to love at the end. But within those dynamics, I'm sure he did breathe a sigh of relief when I departed the inaugural stage and my successor, Governor Edgar, ascended to the office. So Lee, thank you for your service in the legislature. Thank you for the assistance that you gave to me as we tried to solve the problems of this state and push the state forward. And I think it isn't recognized often enough how civility and cordiality and consensus building is important to the political resolution of challenges that any state, but especially a state as large and as dynamic and as important as Illinois. Okay, this is going to be the fun part of the program for me because on a number of occasions I've had to answer questions from people on the panel. Not today. I get to ask the questions. I don't have to express any opinions. I don't have to give any solutions or answers. And they have to perform. And so I'm going to ask them to imagine that if we had a military coup in Illinois, and this panel was installed as the governance of the state, what would they do to achieve the kind of state that we would all be proud of? A dynamic state that offered employment and first-class services to its citizens. And since they've spent a lot of time in their lives opining about that, I'm sure the answers will come fast and furious. And I also want to encourage a dialogue among members of the panel. Just because my question is directed to one to start the conversation doesn't mean that I don't expect the others to jump in and say, no, wait a minute. No, here's what's right. Here's what's wrong with that. We want to see that kind of interaction from the panel in order to get you thinking so that when the time for your questions come, this panel will be thoroughly educated, thoroughly grilled, and just ready to take the bull by the horns. So, we're going to start with the hardest question of all. And then when we get through with that, we'll do the easy ones. What is the one problem, just one, what is the one problem facing Illinois that, if fixed, would have the biggest impact on our lives and the state's future? Mr. Dole, start us off.
Thank you, Governor. You know, Mary Ann and I moderated debates, Republican gubernatorial primary debates. It feels like a military coup. I mean, if you saw either of those debates, something is happening here in those primaries. I think I covered the legislature I covered you for 10 years as a reporter. I've written about the legislature as an editorial writer for another 20 years. So I've written about a lot of budget fights, a lot of political fights. This does feel very different. And I think the one thing that has to be the target is employment. We have the third highest unemployment in the country. We're one of two states that last year saw unemployment average rise, and Massachusetts was the other one, and they are much better shape than we are as far as jobs. And the prognosis for Illinois going forward doesn't look very good for job creation. What we've been doing and what state government has been doing, whether it's edge credits or it's nibbling around the edges, it's not getting the job done. We need people in leadership who are going to focus on putting people back to work, both at the high end. I think I was encouraged, and we applauded the idea of the digital manufacturing center that Chicago is going to have, but also at the level of just good jobs, because we're not creating them.
If I may,
Ty.
if I may, I agree with what Bruce has said 100%, but how do we do it? And I think if you put it in the backdrop that 15 or 20 years ago, Illinois was in pretty good shape, certainly as compared to where we are today. Michigan, Indiana, Wisconsin, states surrounding us were in worse shape by any measure of well-being, jobs, the whole bit. In the past several years, and certainly to the present, we've sunk to the bottom. We're at the bottom, whether it's bond rating, whether it's unemployment, whether it's people fleeing the state because there are no jobs. And I think the biggest single thing we can do in the broad sense is to have the General Assembly and the governor, as we go forward, try to create a business-friendly, hospitable environment. That was what happened in Michigan. Michigan is my hometown. I was born and raised there. I saw it go down. I've seen it come back up and surpass us. When Governor Daniels was elected governor of Indiana, I guess 10 years ago now, but in 8 years, they had all the same problems we did. Unpaid bills, pensions not funded, underfunded. What we really need is strong leadership, bipartisan leadership and dialogue that tries to create a business-friendly environment here, because jobs are the answer to everything. You get jobs, you have employment, you have money for education, for the ill, for the whole thing. So I think that's the one single thing that we have to do, and this is not hostile to union interests or any other interest. It's really the answer to all the needs that we have here, in my judgment.
I'd like to add, as a young reporter, when I first met Bruce, I started in Peoria and did cover Governor Thompson, and I recall well the longest Caterpillar strike ever. And Peoria, if you didn't work at Caterpillar, you worked for the nut and bolt maker. You were the doctor that was brought to town. I remember, going and getting a prescription and them asking if I had a CAT card, and I would get a free prescription. And I thought, wow, that's really something there, Too bad I don't work there. But there was a respect during that strike. It was a big deal when Governor Thompson would come down, and I'm sure he went in and spoke with the execs at CAT, but he came to the line and he would talk to the guys on the line and take them into their nearby restaurant and sit around and speak to them. And there wasn't this us versus them constant back and forth going on. And while I, of course, agree with what both have said already, there's just this climate of, us, and I'm going to get mine, what about yours? When's that going to change? When are the unions going to realize there has to be pension reform? And when are those in charge going to give them respect to have a seat at the table? I think that's part of it.
I agree with everything that's been said, but I would add that before you worry a little about business climate, which is an important issue, the shirts versus skin atmosphere that seems to prevail in Springfield now, that Mary referred to, and job creation that Bruce is concerned about. I'm concerned about all three of those things as well. But I think if we could boil it down to just one issue, it would be economic discipline. And that, unfortunately, is affected by all the other things that you three have mentioned. Perhaps because of the business I'm in, that's my focus, but we have a very, very bad perception problem with the investment community. And when the investors are unwilling to come to Illinois, to consider Illinois for jobs, and Bruce, you're right, it was great that we got the digital manufacturing grant from the federal government. I think that's going to be useful and helpful to the state's economic environment. But until the investors believe that there's the will for the decision makers to sit in a room and reach agreement, we're going to have problems. it makes it difficult for us to do anything that is even remotely related to capital projects because we can't raise capital in the traditional way. The traditional way of raising capital in government has always been to borrow money. And when you have some of the major bond buyers who buy Illinois debt suggesting that Illinois be avoided, that Illinois debt be avoided, that creates a situation where it's difficult to get any projects done. You don't have agreement. And one of the things that we hear most frequently from those communities is that there doesn't seem to be a willingness among the political leadership, regardless of party, because for a while now, the leadership in Illinois has been one party, and we still can't seem to get things done. And that unwillingness is why that you'll see the state's and the city of Chicago's credit ratings affected adversely by it. And until we convince the investment community that there is a willingness in Illinois to work together to fix some of these problems, not even fix the problems. Like California, for months, was providing IOUs to its vendors because it couldn't afford to pay them. But the powers that be there did sit in a room and reach some agreement about how to address their financial crisis. We haven't done that, and one of the things that all the investors talk about is that unwillingness. So
Bob,
I think that's it.
traveled wisely, or widely, and I assume wisely as well,
Well, there are a few times that's not been
in
the
the
case.
state of Illinois and across the country and in other countries. So you've had a chance to compare forms of government. You've had a chance to compare the results of people who govern. What's the one problem in Illinois that we need to fix to have the greatest impact?
I would echo the comments of the rest of the panelists. Obviously, fiscal responsibility, the bipartisanship leadership in Springfield and Washington is critical. But I'd emphasize comparatively the very positive message of Illinois. It's the 5th most desirable place to invest. Chicago is the 2nd most desirable place to put a corporate headquarters. We're leaders globally in a commercial center with our trading, Board of Trade, and banking system. Certainly the manufacturing sector is a strength of Illinois, and I think emphasizing those strengths in transportation, manufacturing, education, world-class universities here are opportunities to emphasize the positive. The backside is how do we restrain fiscal irresponsibility. We can't spend more than we take in, and we keep kicking the can down the road. And it will be important elections this year. I think the single most important thing is to have quality candidates who will exercise the leadership in Springfield and Washington to make a difference.
Okay, so put on your CEO hats for a while. You're given the responsibility of deciding where to site your business, whether it's a manufacturing enterprise or a services enterprise, and you can go anywhere you want to in the United States. What factors are you going to look for before making that decision? And where does Illinois rank in looking at those factors? Bruce?
We do talk to a number of employers and prospective employers who come into the Tribune, and I think the great positive I hear is when you could locate right next door to this center and be 5 minutes from the greatest airport in the world. You can get anywhere if you're an international business. Chicago is a good place to live. It has things Indianapolis just doesn't have. The hurdle that I often hear from employers is tax certainty. That if you were going to raise their taxes a little, they could probably live with it. With that overhang, with that great threat in the state government, the fear that there's going to be some kind of a whopping increase in cost of business through taxation seems to put them most on guard. And I think you'd also be surprised to hear how often they think, is this Saturn? You look at 4 governors out of 8 governors who went to prison. What's in the water? And they actually do wonder, if you're going to locate here, are you going to have to pay a bribe?
Wow. So, but corporate taxation, every time we we read a story about a company asking the state for a deal, an incentive to locate in this state, or even lately to stay in this state. Oftentimes it comes out that this corporation pays no taxes in the state of Illinois because of our revenue laws, and because they've got operations all over the globe. They pay little or nothing in state taxes. So can that really be an incentive? Do we focus on that too much?
I think the whole issue of taxes is a bit of a red herring, because Illinois is not the worst in taxation. I think we're in maybe the top third. I brought some notes along that I won't waste your time to refer to, but I can back up generally what I'm suggesting. And I think it true as city of Chicago, when you pile on all the taxes we have there, sales, county, all the rest of it, is the highest of any major city in the country. But the business, this goes back to the business climate issues. The people who supposedly are not paying taxes to Illinois, that we now have some characters that want to do a progressive tax on people and companies, forget that those very people that we're trying to talk about to create jobs here pay millions of dollars in sales tax and income tax and real estate tax for their employees. They create the jobs to provide the money for education and for the rest of what goes on here. We do need, and what the new General Assembly ought to do, and the new governor or the old governor, if he's reelected, should do, is get at a meaningful, fair tax structure. And don't do it the way we do things traditionally here. One side locks off this, the other one takes this position. Get Brookings, get the American Enterprise Institute, get some think tanks to say, this makes sense and here's why. And then the easiest thing, of course, is to look to other states that have reversed the problems that we have, and look at their tax structure in terms of fairness and what it does to generate revenue and jobs. But we are not the worst on this, and the corporate types do pay all sorts of taxes. And that's, once again, is a great divisive issue, a great thing for the people who don't pay any taxes and candidly have their hands out and want more. I'd like to say to the people that have it and they're up doing other things, that has to stop, because we're all in this together.
Well, I'd say, Ty, we compete with states like Texas that don't have a personal state income tax, and many of the states around us have lower, flat, or progressive taxes. And the states that are higher than Illinois now, you're seeing a general push to bring taxes down, as you are in Wisconsin, which has been a relatively higher tax state. We seem to be going against the flow here.
I was not speaking to higher taxes, and I agree with you, Bruce. I won't go back and take up the time. I was trying to suggest, though, that that's only one part of the problem, and it is a false issue to say that corporations don't pay taxes. Once again, it goes back to my opening comment. We need a business-friendly environment here that'll provide jobs for the union and non-union people alike, that'll educate people, the whole thing. And taxation is one part of it. And of course, one of the worst-kept secrets in town anymore is that a lot of the people that are running these companies in here have had enough and don't want to die here and have their estate taxes here, so they're all taking up residence in Florida or Nevada.
I might add that businesses take business risk. They're not willing to take political risk. And to the governor's earlier question about a comparative analysis in emerging markets around the world, foreign investment follows business opportunity, but a key filter is whether there's business risk. Is there some confiscatory policy, whether it's taxes or a takeover, that would interfere with pure business risk? And so to the extent that we can reduce the perception that there's political risk in Illinois, that you're going to start a business here and face higher taxes, higher regulation, that interferes with the business risk profile, I think is an impediment to future investment.
Excuse me, I think it also depends on what the industry is, because there are certain industries that have trouble looking at Illinois because, and this is uncomfortable for a lot of us to talk about, but the workforce problem that we have. We were discussing at dinner last night, in the city of Chicago, there's a 65% graduation rate, and that's now being heralded by the current administration, because for the previous 3 or 4 years, it was 50%. So when 1 of every 2 kids is not graduating high school, you don't have a really highly educated workforce like you can, certainly offshore in some Asian countries, and even in other states adjacent to Illinois. Some of our competitors are right here in, as you indicated, Indiana and Wisconsin. So that's one of the more uncomfortable elements that is considered by corporations when they think about whether to come to Illinois, specifically Chicago. Just bad workforce.
And just throw in one last one is the public transportation. I mean, if you're going to locate, your workers want to have options. They want to be able to take a train, a bus, whatever it is to get there. Our infrastructure is in such poor shape. Metro is not something that you can rely on every single day, or the CTA, or what else, PACE. And why not? That should be. You go to the cities where things run smoothly, and that's one of the things folks like living there, is that you can hop on their L or their Metro and get to where you want to go.
It's a great point. In fact, it's one of the factors that led us not to get the Olympics. Poor transportation, public transportation. Good point.
Well, how do we fix that? I mean, there's no question that all the modes of transportation in Illinois are related. Okay? People fly into O'Hare. They either take a train downtown, they rent a car and drive downtown, or out to the suburbs, or somewhere else in the state of Illinois. I'm going to say something that may either surprise you or amuse you. A credible argument can be made that Illinois is the transportation center of the world. Now, why do I say that? I say that because Illinois has within its boundaries every mode of transportation, and a number of them are stronger than, or more utilized, than in any other state in the country. If the United States is the economic center of the world, which it is, and if Illinois is the transportation center of the United States, then in a very real sense, Illinois is the transportation center of the world. But the question is, raised over here, do we act like it? We don't act like it. Would central control of our transportation mode be the answer? Let's suppose we have a board, a regional board, that runs O'Hare, Midway, the CTA, Metra, the RTA, the waterways, the railroads. Put them all together. One board is responsible for everything. Does that work?
You know, until a couple of months ago, you might have said, let's do the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And then we saw what happened when a governor can have some influence.
Well, we saw also what happened with with Metro, that didn't work out so well. I don't know if that is central, I don't know if that's going to work.
You know, when the governor, I remember this, I hope he does, but when he was running for governor the first time, he had a part of his stump speech was Illinois is the crossroads of America because of our waterways, our public transportation at that time that was great, our airport, the second busiest and the busiest in the world that was under expansion. And I do think we still have all that going, but what has happened, and this is meant to be critical or not, it's like so many of our assets, when we were on top, economically, education, everything else, once again, 15 or 20 years ago, there's been a paucity of leadership at all levels, gubernatorial all the way down to leaders in the state that have let it go down. The infrastructure issues, we can't always turn to the federal government and do it. We haven't done it here, and you can't be spending money on infrastructure if you don't go back and have a balanced budget and prudent spending and the other things that are necessary. And, this is not an answer at all, but I wonder how a place like Michigan, where I grew up once again, and watch it go from a city of 2 million down to where it is now and starting back up. And this is not a paid political announcement for Republican governors, but rather for leadership. Look what Governor Snyder has been able to do with that in a very short period of time. Look what Governor Daniels did in Indiana. You can be a fan of Governor Walker's or not in Wisconsin, but he's done tremendous things here in all the polls, and I think what we need is some leadership that stakes out, and this might be good for our gubernatorial candidates, to say, not here's what I'm against, here's what I'm going to do, and here's how I want to do it. And of course, to do that, they're going to have to be, whoever the candidate, the successful Republican candidate or Governor Quinn is, you got to get back to where you can talk to the legislative leadership and have an amount of respect for those people. And Senator Radonio here, by the way, and Speaker Madigan and Durkin, Jim Durkin, the leader. This is not about pension reform, but I have a sign of hope here, because I can tell you they got that bill pushed through because they were all talking to one another, and the governor wanted to sign a bill. He was out there to sign the bill, but she and they and all the people I mentioned, the other two as well, and I suppose Senator Cullerton grudgingly, if the truth be told, they all got together. But I do think there's an opportunity for the leadership we have right now and the new governor or the old governor with the new face to start attacking some of these things. I really believe that, and I'm very optimistic about it.
We're going to get to pension reform in a minute, because it's been hailed as salvation for the state of Illinois in the fiscal sense. But let's nibble on transportation one more time. How many of you in driving here today hit potholes? Hands? Potholes?
How about it?
Okay, so that's a current topic. So it takes money, lots of money, billions of dollars, to keep our transportation systems in good repair. Whether it's highways or mass transit or airports or waterways, it takes money, as well as dedicated people to spend the money in the appropriate way. So let's just take highways, which bisect Illinois. Illinois has more highways than many states. We're in a temperature zone where they're subject to freeze-thaw. So you get these crevices in highways, and you get these potholes in highways. And if it's a bad winter like we've just endured, the problem is worse. When was the gas tax last raised? Anybody know?
No, but I recall that when you did it, Governor Edgar, then Secretary of State Edgar wasn't happy about it.
Right.
But
But we raised it. When's the last time we did it in Illinois?
It's been
no, the point is you raised because I had to. I can't answer your question, but was it since
Anybody
then?
know how long it's been since we raised the gas tax?
Late 80s.
24 years.
Yeah.
Gas tax has been at the same level in the state of Illinois for 24 years. Think about all the other things that are common to your lives, and breakfast this morning, does it cost more today than it did 24 years ago? Hotel rooms, clothes, automobiles, you name what, homes. Very few things are the same price as they were 24 years ago. The other tax on gasoline is a sales tax. We're one of 3 states in the country that puts a sales tax on gas as well. So our total taxes in Illinois are fairly high. But does that sales tax on gasoline go to the roads? No. It goes into the state's general revenue fund. So we burden a fuel that lets us drive on these highways with a tax system that A, is way out of date, B, doesn't do the job because half of it goes to the general revenue fund to be spent for whatever reason the state decides to spend it. And so we have a big transportation deficit in Illinois, whether it's roads and bridges or all the other modes of transportation. And The problem is that there's no will to fix this deficit because politicians generally, and certainly in Illinois, are afraid of voter wrath if they raise the gas tax. And the compounding problem, as cars get more fuel efficient and you can drive more miles on the same tank of gas, we end up with more people driving than ever before on a huge road system that's subject to weather challenges. People are using fewer gallons of gas in their car because the government has mandated that cars be more efficient. So we got usage up to here, we got revenues down to here, there's no match. It doesn't make any sense. Should we take the sales tax that's now imposed on gasoline and let that carry the burden? Abolish the gallonage tax. Put it all in the price of fuel, which can go up or down, and dedicate all of it to the transportation systems, not just the roads and the highways. Would that work?
Well, I certainly favor the matching concept you suggested because people ought to be paying for the services they use, and there's a intuitive sensibility about matching taxes to usage. The notion that infrastructure is crumbling is, as everyone knows, a failure to reinvest in it. You don't build a house and just wait until your roof falls in to replace it. There's chronic and constant maintenance, and we have lived for the moment rather than investing in the future, and now the cost of rehabilitation is far exceeds what the maintenance cost would have been. So if there's a way to create fiscal responsibility, I think it begins there.
I think you're going to get a lot of pushback of folks who are going to say, yeah, remember when the lotto was going to go to education? I mean, are you really going to have this money go? They don't trust you. You know, they just don't believe that that gas tax money is going to the roads. And what happened also to maybe the road, who are the people repairing the roads? What materials are they using? Perhaps they need to go back this new digital lab and come up with a better way of paving these roads that the materials are going to last longer. So I don't think folks are going to buy it.
Well, folks won't buy it, but it goes back to my comment a short time ago. I won't characterize it, but what we're lacking here is leadership because the idea speaks for itself. It's kind of common sense, and that's what a politician or a leader is supposed to do, is to lead and convince the public this is in their enlightened self-interest to do this. So come along with me, it'll all be better. And if you have better roads, you have a bunch of other things too. But I think that that the historical lack of a leader or leadership has been absent for a long, long time.
I think people are suspicious about whether the money they're putting in now is being well spent. And if they went down to Springfield, they see the asphalt lobby guys arguing with the concrete.
Come on, you can applaud.
That is it.
They'd see, why do we have potholes? Because the asphalt lobbyists won a little more money than the concrete lobbyists won, which is a more durable but longer lasting but more expensive product. Ask, do we need a regional transportation authority with all of its board and its bureaucrats on top of a Chicago Transportation Authority with its board and all of its bureaucrats governing the bus that runs down Irving Park Road, the number 80, or could you just contract out and have somebody run the bus? I think people are they're just suspicious about how the money's being spent.
Well, I think, that's right. I spent 15 years campaigning across the state of Illinois, and there are great cultural and political differences between Chicago or Southern Illinois or Western Illinois. I spent a lot of time in Western Illinois, where too often the people in the press refer to themselves as Forgotonia. What does that mean? It means that the legislature and the governor and everybody else in the state has forgotten about Western Illinois. Why is that? Because there are not enough highways in Western Illinois, and they don't get their fair share in Western Illinois. I used to think it was something in the water of Western Illinois, but it's a wide, deeply felt belief. I can remember talking to a guy in Western Illinois as we cut the ribbon on a highway from Quincy to Springfield. And I thought this would be, you know, a remarkable achievement to bring transportation to Western Illinois so you could drive from Quincy to Springfield, assuming you wanted to drive from Quincy to Springfield. And this fellow says to me, he says, well, it's about time, you know, they, the mysterious they, take all of our gas tax money in Western Illinois and send it up to Chicago. And I thought, oh my God, let's see. If you compare the amount of gas tax money that comes out of Western Illinois with the amount of gas tax money that comes out of the city of Chicago, I don't think we're taking the gas tax from Western Illinois and shipping it up to Chicago. Likely the reverse is true, that we're taking gas tax money from Chicago and shipping it down to Western Illinois, where there are fewer roads, therefore there are fewer drivers, therefore there are fewer people paying gas tax. But you can never convince people of that mathematical proposition. So any attempt to raise taxes or equalize taxes or dedicate taxes to a transportation system is going to run into this deeply felt cultural division within the state of Illinois because we're so massive that they're not getting their fair share.
Well, there's no evidence that we've ever really honored that commitment. I mean, every time we say a temporary tax to be used for these purposes that will expire by its terms is now being talked about as a permanent tax. There's never been an experience with our legislative leadership that suggests that they can be trusted to honor the commitments that were made. And so citizens, I think, are naturally reticent, despite the good ideas, to really believe that this time it's going to be different when there's decades of history of just the opposite.
You know, this all goes back to Ty's comments about leadership, because when I had the good fortune of working for you, Governor, on your staff, you may recall we raised taxes after suggesting perhaps we didn't have to. And we had the same opposition, particularly from the business community, that you would have today. But the way things were done then was a little bit differently. There was a little different. There was actual dialogue, because you entrusted me with the responsibility, which really means I got the short straw, to go explain to business leaders like Mr. Malott, Bob Malott, the then chairman of FMC, why it was necessary. But one of the things that your staff provided us with as we were pitching the need for taxes and making things work, revenue equal spending, was a lot of statistical data to show what would happen in the event that we didn't raise taxes and we didn't have the revenue for the necessary spending. And what I see today, and you know, I'm not as involved obviously as I used to be, but I don't see that level of statistical data and support for the propositions that, Ty, that you've been referring to. And I think that, I don't know, how does a leader do that, Ty? Do we go back to white papers that support the common sense nature of some of the propositions that we're pushing? Or is that, as Mary Ann referred to, in a shirts and skins world, does that not even work anymore?
I don't know. I clearly don't know. And the reason I'm so general about leadership is because you know it when you see it and the people lead, and there hasn't been a lot of it lately. So I guess all I can say is we ought to look at the candidates running for governor, including our present governor, and see if any of them, if they don't have the right stuff now, are capable of achieving it. But I mean, I can't be, what makes a leader, and you have to believe deeply, and frankly, you have to be bright enough to know what you're steering and doing. And once again, this is like old time week in a sense, because I worked for the governor in the U.S. Attorney's Office. I worked for him as Director of Law Enforcement. He appointed me to fill out Bill Scott's term. He's a devoted friend that I've always admired, and I've always said, in his presence and out of it, he was a leader and an affable leader. We were talking last night at dinner with Lee and others. I used to be on the sidelines watching Lee and Pate Phillip and Phil Rock and Tom Hines at the White House beating him up, and they would sit down and have a couple of drinks, and then the next morning they had a deal because they treated each other with respect. He knew where he was going. We had legislative leaders at the time that were capable enough to say to their constituencies, be it, well, the obvious constituencies, okay, that okay, we will do it. Was it perfect? No, but it was damn sight better than now, and I do see that in personal qualities. Once again, Mitch Daniels is a man that I admire greatly. I've watched him a lot in how he deals with people and how he leads. But we need something like that here, and I don't know if that's in our current crop or in a future crop, but until we, and the General Assembly people will tell you quite properly, whether it's Christine or Madigan or anyone else, a governor is supposed to lead. And if you don't have that, you're not going to have a solution to problems, whether it's highways or taxes or other things, in my judgment. So I can't really answer. It's easy to pontificate with no responsibility.
Well, I thank you for the commercial, but let's try one more angle on the taxes before we move on to something else. We've talked about high taxes. What about fair taxes? Do we have a tax system in the state of Illinois that's fair? I mean, the ideal ought to be that we have low taxes on a wide base of economic activity, right? Rather than high taxes on a narrow base of economic activity. But that's a problem that's getting tougher and tougher in Illinois. What do I mean by that? Illinois, back in 1933 or 34, when the sales tax, which is our second largest form of revenue today, the sales tax, back in 1934, it was imposed on manufactured goods and agribusiness goods, but not on services. Services were a very small part of the Illinois economy back in 1934. Manufacturing and agribusiness was almost the whole story. But what's the situation today in Illinois? Today it's almost evenly divided between manufactured goods and services. 50% of our gross product in Illinois today is manufactured goods, and 50% of our gross product in Illinois today is services. We tax the use and consumption of manufactured goods, but we don't tax, with very rare exception, services. So we have an imbalanced tax system. That's what drives the rate of taxation in Illinois. I mean, you get to Chicago and you add up the state sales tax and the county sales tax and the city sales tax, and boy, you've got a whopping sales tax. But services, no matter what they are, medical services, legal services, common ordinary day services, haircuts, go untaxed. And pretty soon, the service side of the economy is going to get more than 50% of Illinois' gross product. And we'll have to think about raising the rate, already high enough, I think, on the sale of goods, because we continue to do nothing about the sale of services. Should we have a sales tax in Illinois, or a use tax as it's technically called, that covers a wide range of goods and services, but at a much lower rate than we have today, and still funds what we need to do in government. Boy, you want to be bold leaders up here on the panel? Take that one on.
That's bold. That would be bold.
I would lead by saying, at least as to haircuts, I only get one once a year, so I'm probably not going to contribute to deficit reduction. But not only is the issue of untaxed revenues a concern, but and the internet is just another example of that. But the broad tax base, which was your first point, I think also needs to be addressed. We have fewer people paying taxes than ever before. And how to address increasing the base and creating a fair tax system. I agree with Ty that I think really it ought to be a global approach rather than a little bit here and a little bit there, and we end up with, a 7,000-page tax code.
Bruce has some very strong opinions on this. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I would say yes, that we should. We should tax services and use that as a means to lower income tax rates and lower sales tax rates. If you can make it genuinely revenue neutral, people would be less suspicious about it, I think. But it's never gotten a lot of traction in Springfield because you'd be taxing legal fees, and there are, the number of lawyers per square inch in Springfield is pretty high. Would you agree? I mean, that's one of the reasons that it doesn't go anywhere. So what are we talking about instead? We're talking about a graduated income tax. The last plan I saw on that would be a graduated income tax, and that's being sold as fairness, but it would cost anybody making more than $58,000 a year more money.
If there was any commercial of the mayoral race of Gary Chico versus Rahm Emanuel, it was the cab driver who said, I don't want to pay the ROM tax, and I don't mean to make fun of his accent, but it was the only thing that sort of caught on as far as critical of the mayor, saying, wait a second, you're going to tax the guy who is cutting the hair of the dogs, the pets. Aren't they the small business leaders? Aren't they the guys we want to prop up and help and keep the economy going? So we talked about those corporations that aren't paying any tax at all. I think we need to talk about them before we start talking about the poor guy who's got the little business cutting hair.
Well, if you do that, you can, and this is a good place to join. If you keep taxing those that don't pay taxes, find out if they're not paying taxes because the tax structure and code in the state is deficient, not whether they're willing to. Most of the people on the civic committee, and this is a paid commercial announcement because I work with them, they don't care about taxes, and our companies don't care about taxes. They pay plenty of taxes individually, and as the members, it's not going to change the way they live. And I just think, once again, you've got to find out, what is a tax structure that'll work, that'll fund things. I also disagree, just to be controversial, with the suggestion that lawyers and accountants and professionals, forget about the barber, wouldn't like to be taxed. The people that fall into those groups, whether they're a sole practitioner or in a large law firms, they're not going to give up and leave the state if they get taxed. My law firm, Mayor Brown, is in 13 countries and 8 states here, and we get the hell taxed out of us. I have to fill out money and pay money to New York and California. Why am I paying to Illinois? That's okay with me. Is it going to change the way that I've lived or would live? No, it's not. If it would help it, we had to do it. And I also think that professional people, doctors, lawyers, accountants, are the worst lobbyists to really push anything other than beefing, and I speak as one, than any other group. They're not organized. They have an opinion on everything. But once again, they've got a good life, and they're not going to leave this state if, in fact, they were taxed reasonably, whatever that means, for their services.
And to add, and like Ty, our firm is international. Our services are rendered with a tax almost everywhere outside the United States. So it's common industry practice to charge a sales tax, if you will, on legal services outside the United States. The difference is that taxes are never really, an issue for the first person that pays the tax. It's always ultimately to the individual. And that's where the issue is. I mean, paying a tax on legal services ultimately affects the price of those legal services, and it's borne by the consumer.
So we've talked a lot about what needs to be done and whether there's the political will to do it in the legislature and the governor, whoever the governor may be after November. We've talked about people's suspicions that the taxes they pay now are not being well spent for state goods and services, that there may be favoritism towards one area of the state as against another area of the state. So let's go to the question that lies perhaps underneath all of that feeling. Is Illinois the most corrupt state in the country? Bruce, are we? You can applaud.
We are. There's your answer. I get asked a lot, and I don't know that I have a good answer. What's in the water of Illinois? Is it opportunity? Is it just is it tradition? We just had another city council member embroiled in a possible low-level corruption deal going down. We haven't arrested a governor now in 6 years. We're on a roll.
Well, are we more corrupt, or are we better at finding out corruption and prosecuting it?
That's my view. I mean,
Bob?
some of us are former federal prosecutors, as am I, and I don't think human nature is any different in the state of Illinois than it is anywhere else. I think we've had a culture in Illinois of prosecuting public officials who abuse the public trust, and we've been pretty good at it. Of course, it's a horrible public relations image for the state of Illinois, but I, for one, believe that it's not unique to Illinois. We're just better at ferreting it out and prosecuting the offenders.
I guess I would argue that Minnesota is a cesspool we just haven't figured out, though.
I think also the one-party control, to have folks there for so long, term limits is part of this discussion because, once you're in, if you aren't out on that very first reelection effort, you've got probably in there for a long time. And boy, that doesn't breed any kind of good stuff sometimes. I think that is part of the problem. Speaker Madigan, too long, 37 years. Mayor Daley, too long, 22 years. Term limits, let's go.
Well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. What's the number one issue of the past legislative session that everybody, reporters, editorial writers, people generally, wanted to get done? Pension reform, right? That's all people talked about in Springfield all last year, and we're going to ask Ty whether it's the nirvana that some people think it is. But how did that get done? If Mike Madigan hadn't put his shoulder to the wheel behind pension reform, would it have passed? No, I don't think. So why would you term limit out a legislator who got the biggest legislative accomplishment that everybody wanted to happen done last year?
The Governor, the assumption there is that you couldn't have gotten that done without a powerful Speaker of the House.
Right.
I think I'd argue we got into the same mess that we got into because of a powerful Speaker of the House.
Well,
it took 5 years to fix the problem, but it took 30 years to build it.
Yeah, but if you look at the history of pensions in Illinois, it's fair to say that 98% of the legislatures had something to do with the pension mess during all those years. So I don't think you can put the collar just on Mike Madigan, but I think you can say that he was the key to getting pension reform done. Plus, let's go to a more basic question. Aren't term limits taking away from individual citizens their right to choose their representatives and leaders? Why should there be an arbitrary term limit? 4 years, 8 years? What's magical about that? Why do you want to trade experience for new people who themselves would quickly become term limited before they had a chance to contribute to the solution of Illinois problems?
Well, first of all, I can make that argument, but part of the problem is not term limits. It's the current mapping. It doesn't matter if you have the term limit's the only way you can get at it, because there's nothing going to happen. There's nothing going to happen to change leadership at any level in Illinois unless people die or retire, and for at least another 8 years until there's another redistricting and go through that. Because just as in other states, the Republicans drew the maps so they control those states. You might look at Texas. They do it, and they're making a lot of money and no taxes and everything else. But we did it here, and candidly, there are some hotly contested elections, but they're few and far between. Because the way the districts are drawn, you can't get people out of there with a jackhammer unless you do term limits. I agree with what the governor said at another level, because I do feel deeply that if you really believe that you should be able to pick your representatives, you shouldn't have someone tell you can't choose that person anymore. The converse is obvious as well. Do we really? Let's leave Illinois alone for a second. Look at our U.S. Congress, which is another sorry group, and I think last night it was a 12% approval rating, which goes on every day, and we won't talk about the president. If you're there, it's almost impossible, unless you're individually wealthy or something else, to break into to unseat any of those people, good, bad, or indifferent. And then one comment about, if I may, I think part of the problem, which goes to term limits or not, I'm not sure, but spending the better part of the last 3 years, which were very different than the years I spent in Springfield years ago, when it was the kinder, gentler, and courteous, and everyone talked and were less partisan. But I have a view down there. The problem with the great majority of the General Assembly is that has become their job. That's how they pay their bills. That's why they're worried about pensions, their own or others. They're worried about how do we get reelected. How do we get reelected? It takes money. And if we don't please the people giving the money, and in Illinois, I can prove this, Republican and Democrat alike, some of the poor people in this room have heard this speech from me. It's because the unions, the public employee unions, by the way, lay so much money, $10 million the last cycle, 8.5 the cycle before that. I've got those figures here that I can identify going right to Republican and Democratic General Assembly legislators. And so anybody who crosses those people thinks, my God, I'm going to lose my job. I might have to get a real one. The corruption point is some of the people in the General Assembly, some of the people that are down there, they like their jobs. They like to be called senator or representative or governor. Excuse me. But the fact is, a lot of their business that they do outside of the General Assembly comes because they have that title and the apparent ability to make things happen. And I don't know if that happens in other places, and I'm not sure the term limits would solve it, but it is a reality. And you have too many people there that go down there. I think in the first instance, what can I do for the people in my district? And all of a sudden it becomes their income. And, so that's why we have the corruption.
So we should cut legislative salaries.
I don't know if we should cut legislative salaries. There used to be a joke when we were down there, Governor, too, that the General Assembly's out for the summer, everybody's safe. I don't know if we cut salaries. I don't know if they're too long or too little. But I do think that that's part of the problem. And there are some very, very good people, and I'm not going to name them out. Some of them are in the room, I'm not pandering to them, are very good people who provide leadership. I do want to tag on what you said, though. And I think I've had this discussion with some of the people on, at least one of them on the stage. The pension bill would not have passed. For whatever Madigan is responsible for, isn't that bill would not have passed or moved at all without the Speaker's leadership, working once again with Christine Radonio and Jim Durkin, which is a new thing because there's been a lot of this stuff down there. And they talked courteously and they counted votes. And as some of my fine Republican friends, some of which are running for higher office, were sliding off voting for the pension bill, they used a great excuse, it's not enough or it's too hard or something. As Christine was losing some of her votes, Madigan would get on the phone and literally put the votes on, and the same thing happened in the House. And so, whatever you want to think about that guy, he is currently, you can love him, hate him, or indifferent, but he is a true leader down there, and he is going to, if anything's going to happen in the near term, it'll happen because of his leadership, working with two people of common goodwill, and because leadership isn't coming anywhere else down there right now.
Well, I think we should also add that the other driving force behind pension reform in the state of Illinois last year was Ty Fahner and his work alongside the legislative leaders. Now, let me ask you, Ty, you can applaud. Let me ask you this, Ty. The question is going to come up about whether or not we continue the temporary income tax increase that happened a couple of years ago, or do we let it die off in stages as the law provides? And if we let it die off, we face what, a $3 billion, $4 billion hole in the state budget? And what do we do then? You cannot cut $3 or $4 billion from discretionary spending in the state of Illinois without decimating your schools and your social services. There just isn't enough money for that to begin with. And if you cut $3 or $4 billion out of that because you can't cut Medicaid and you can't cut welfare and you can't cut other things, you got this terrible budget hole. Now, some will say, maybe Ty will say it, that the money saved with pension reform, should the Supreme Court of Illinois hold it to be constitutional, as I suspect they will that money fill the budget hole so that you can let the temporary income tax go, or part of the temporary income tax go? Is that a possibility, Ty?
I'm not smart enough, and there's no false humility to give you the true answer. I'll give you my answer, and that is that I'm the president of the Civic Committee. What that means is I used to be a member, now I'm the employee of all the key CEOs in the state, the head of the airlines, the banks, AT&T, you name it. But they collectively, when they meet, which is only quarterly, will talk about things like this. And my remarks earlier about I didn't think we were so high in taxes in the scheme of things, they, as leaders of companies that have shareholders that they have to act in the best interest of and decide whether they stay in Illinois or go somewhere else, like Oberhelman has done at CAT, will tell you they don't think that it's wrong to continue the tax indefinitely. They won't say that on the record. In fact, they think it's probably needed. You need revenue so you can build the roads and educate and so forth. Their complaint, and my complaint in trying to answer the governor's question is, the cuts don't have to always come from Medicaid, and it can't come from Medicaid and the elderly and the underserved and people that honestly need help. But there's still a great deal of, there's not a budget down there. The tax was put in, as I recall it, on the last day of the assembly before the switchover. We all know that history now, to pay the unpaid bills. Well, it didn't pay the unpaid bills. We still have between $5 and $8 billion of unpaid bills, depending on who's counting on what day and who's running for office and giving out the numbers. The money went into the pension fund, which is why we had to fix the pensions to begin with, and to fix it is an overstatement, but to improve them. But it's a big circle, but they're all interrelated. I'm sorry I'm rambling like this, but I think the taxes, you have to pay for what you get to live in a state like this, in the wonderful city that we live in this wonderful state. So I think taxes are only part of the issue, but it should be bundled, if you're going to continue it, with a meaningful budget. And we haven't seen a budget that could be discussed by the General Assembly. And once again, just to put it where it is, that usually comes from the governor. That's what happens. And you go to your legislative leaders and say, this is how we ought to do it, and here's why. And that's been lacking for quite a period of time, Quinn and certainly pre-Quinn.
I would add that experienced leadership in Springfield has put us where we are today. The unfunded pension liability is estimated to be $100 billion. So while making the temporary tax permanent would be deja vu all over again, we promised it would only be temporary, but now we've found that it needs to be permanent, only further erodes the public trust in our legislative leaders. And for me, I don't think our government was created with the notion that we would create a permanent political leadership community. It was considered to be an obligation of citizenship to serve the public, not permanently and forever as a career, but as an opportunity to give back to your community. And we've now got it upside down where we get the kinds of unintended consequences with people continuing in office, voting for their own special and personal interests, ending up with peculiar redistricting. I live about a mile from here, but my congressman lives right behind Wrigley Field. I don't know that there's a lot of community between that district, but it's an unintended or obviously intended consequence of not having some limit on the power of our leaders in Springfield.
I knew we'd get one of these. This question comes from a retired teacher. As governors and past legislatures have always promised teachers their pension, for which they've paid 10%, that it was safe and would never be touched, how can we trust elected officials after this pension reform?
And boy, you're going to see as they tackle the Chicago public school teachers this year, it's going to be a fight. I'm a former teacher, believe it or not, 5 years before I went back to journalism school. So of course, teachers are near and dear to my heart. There is going to be some changes. There's no way around it. Is it fair? No. Is it going to, I think if they have a seat at the table, at least to have part of the discussion, that will help. But to put your head in the sand and say it's not going to change, it is lying to folks. You gotta accept it. It absolutely is not fair, but there's going to be a change to how those pensions are given out.
It has nothing to do with fairness. It's grossly unfair. And during the pension debate over the last 3 years in Springfield, it was interesting. I think I'm backing the point up that the trades unions, the non-public employees unions, if you will, said privately, and you didn't see them pounding the table on behalf of the public employees, the teachers, ASPE, and so forth, say, what don't they get? The world has changed. It isn't fair, but what if you worked for Chrysler or General Motors, or what if you were in one of my positions and we lost all of our pensions? And this is all about how do you save at least a good part of the pensions for the public employees. It isn't fair, and it's particularly not fair to people who are no longer in a position to change the way that they care for themselves. If you've been a teacher and you're in your 60s or 70s, you can't go out and get a second job except perhaps at McDonald's to supplement your income. I think it just is grossly unfair, but we all, in our private lives, personal lives, we're in the world we live in. We have setbacks and things go forward for it, and there's no other way around it. And this, if the state looked tough, Senator Radonio and the rest wait until they come to you from the city with what has to be done to deal with the teachers, CTU, and then the police and fire. That is, the numbers, by comparison, are twice as bad and twice as difficult.
Okay, a personal question. The son or daughter of your next door neighbor, a recent graduate of Elmhurst College, comes to you and says, I finished college, I want to start my career, I can pretty much go anywhere. Should I stay in the state of Illinois or should I look elsewhere? I'm concerned about my future. What are you going to tell him? Bob, what are you going to tell him?
Well, the fact that they went to Elmhurst College is all that needs to be said. He or she will have unlimited opportunities. As I said at the beginning, Chicago and Illinois is an absolutely fabulous place to begin a career, and all of us have spent our careers here, and we're living proof that it's a wonderful place to live and raise a family and create opportunities for your family. The assets that we have here are world class, and I think that the opportunities in innovation and new technologies, new industries are only going to be the beginning of what could be a very profitable career for this young person. Their chances of getting a job, despite the grim unemployment statistics in Illinois, are greater as a college graduate than they would be in many other states.
Now, if that's true, why are we so down on ourselves? We spent the last hour being down on Illinois. Isn't that a disconnect?
Well, not for me. I think this is a wonderful place, one of the best places in the world to live and work. And I think some of the issues that have to be addressed are obviously very serious, but they can be with the right leadership. And the solutions that have been suggested can make it even better. But I am not down on Illinois, and I'm not feeling that the world is coming to an end based on the problems we're facing.
Todd, what are you going to tell that next door neighbor?
I completely agree. As a matter of fact, I had my own kids ask me that question, so I can answer it from experience. I agree with almost everything Rob said about working, living, and raising a family in the Chicago metropolitan area, in Illinois generally. You and I, Governor, used to go around the world pitching, and this is the third coast for all of the cultural amenities that we have here, some of the best museums, some of the best architecture in the world, some of the finest universities in the world are right here in our metropolitan area. I do think there's this leadership deficit that Ty has addressed all morning that we all have to pay some attention to, but it doesn't detract from the overall wonder of this great city and this state. You used to say this, a lot of what I'm saying, I'm recalling from when we did go around pitching Illinois. It's the most American of states, you used to tell us. And it has diversity on every level. It is the best microcosm among all the 50 states that best defines what America's about. And whether it's agribusiness, this new digital manufacturing business that we're going to get here, we've always been near the top. So yeah, we have some dramatic issues, particularly economic and budget issues, and we have a leadership deficit, but we have a lot of bright people here who can help us solve some of these issues, at least talk about them. And this is a beginning.
Ty, you came from Michigan to Illinois to start your career. What did you tell your son about where he should go?
Well, my son and his wife and two of my grandchildren live in Winnetka. I have a daughter who's a marine biologist, and her family live in Glen Allen, and two more grandchildren there. And I told them, this is your home, and unless you have a better opportunity for yourselves professionally, they grew up watching a number of the people that are in this room, Daniels and Tom. I said, it's your state, take it back. Get active and start telling people what it is. And they each do that in their own way. And I wouldn't tell them to leave, because they can bring it back just as and hopefully not all the way down like Michigan. But no, I had no hesitancy. I love this place. It's my place. I'm resentful of things we've been talking about that have gone the way it has, because it doesn't have to be that way. But it's all the things Todd said. I won't repeat them. It's the place where I've made my choice to live, and my family, and I love the place. I'm proud of it. And I just want to keep pounding, as old as I am, trying to get people to do things that might make it a better place for my grandkids. That's all.
Marianne?
I grew up in Michigan City, Indiana, which is nearly a suburb. It seems as if it's a suburb. We took the South Shore train in. I think I grew up making sure that I was a part of Chicago more than sometimes I make my own children. You know, we were constantly coming in to take part in whatever was going on. So now with one who just graduated from college, one who's in college, and one who's about to go to college, this is right in my, bailiwick right now. Of course, they loved the city. I think the question is more, how do we keep the city and the suburbs in a partnership rather than this adversarial of let's win the headquarters down to the city and take it away from Palatine or wherever it might have been. And so that it is conducive to live in both places, and that the city isn't so expensive versus, and that the education, there are more options, that you, if you can't afford the Latin and the U of C lab school, that you don't go dashing to the suburbs. So yes, Illinois, of course, you know, as a reporter in Atlanta, after I left Peoria to Atlanta, I couldn't wait to get back to Chicago. And the folks in Atlanta thought I was crazy. You know, what do you want to go there for? It's so cold, it's awful. And of course, I love it here. This is fabulous, but I do think there is a lot of disparity going on between the city and the suburbs.
Bruce?
I grew up in New Jersey, very close to where Tony Soprano lived. So I came to Illinois to escape the corruption. And we have two grown daughters. We have lured one back to Chicago, living on the near north side, and just loves it. And I think there's a good chance that she will stay with all the great advantages. The other one lives in London. That's a tougher sell to get her out of there. I, like Mary Ann, think that maybe the big issue is Chicago is a lure for 23 and 24-year-olds. It's whether it can keep them when they're 28 and 30 years old and they get married and they start having kids and they flee to the suburbs. That those young, productive families are not necessarily staying in the city, and that's largely because of one thing we haven't talked too much about today is the education system there.
Okay, that's a good lead into the next question. Here's a headline in the Chicago Tribune or on your television screens that I never want to see. Is Chicago the next Detroit? I mean, more often you're seeing reference to that, right? Our bond rating is declining. City services are going to have to become more expensive. The pension issues in the city are just an extraordinary challenge, and yet they're going to impact on the people most important to us. The teachers who educate our children, the police who guard our safety. The first obligation of any government is to keep its citizens safe, and the fire services who protect our homes and businesses. So with those kinds of problems, taxes, pensions, infrastructure demands, murder on the streets, on the south and west side, taking the lives not just of other gang members, but of innocent people, sometimes children, playing in their front yard. Are we in danger of becoming Detroit? No. No, Todd? Todd says no.
No, Governor, I read those rating reports, the very rating reports that sort of engendered all this discussion about Chicago becoming the next Detroit. And what those reports also indicate that isn't widely reported because it's not as sensational is that the underlying base here, tax base and otherwise, exists to sustain the city. The problem we have is the one that I referred to at the very beginning, and that Ty is obsessed with, this lack of leadership, the political lack of will of the leaders to get in a room and ferret out an agreement on budgets and on pension reform. So the investment community, the capital markets look at Chicago at Illinois as a place where there is an underlying base. It can be fixed. There just doesn't appear to be the political will to fix it. And that's what confounds outsiders. I spend a lot of time outside of Illinois, and they're confounded by how serious people won't sit in a room and pay attention to something so important. Now, the headlines you get about $17 million a day in additional interest we pay because of our unwillingness to solve these problems are sensationalism. Unfortunately, they happen also to be true. But no, we will not become Detroit unless a lot of bad things happen. We have a strong employment base here, strong employers, highly rated credits. We don't risk becoming Detroit. We're not losing population, so no.
All right, here's a possible solution to the lack of legislative will and leadership. Colorado has shown that the recreational use of marijuana can be profitable to the state. They're going to collect $145 million in tax revenue they had before, than they had before. The federal government isn't interfering, so any state could do it. Should Illinois have a recreational marijuana law which might produce those civil, cordial, let's sit down and get it done meetings in Springfield? Now, maybe, you know, we sell liquor, which sometimes leads to friendliness and civil discourse, sometimes leads to big fights, so let's put that aside. Marijuana should make everything smooth and easy, right? And we'll fill the budget hole. Should Illinois follow Colorado? I mean, should we, you know, zone out a little bit, or should we be vigilant and sharp and keep our edge?
If we were selling enough marijuana to close a $100 billion pension hole, none of you folks would be here today. You'd be sleeping it off. Yeah. Colorado's kind of a different place.
Yeah, it sure is. Anybody else want to try that one?
Not messing with that.
No. Okay.
Governor Brown on TV over the weekend, I don't know if any of you saw it on one of the Sunday talk shows. I flick around, but I got a kick out of him because of his history, and he used to be called Governor Moonbeam and so forth. And he has this great, he's been a great governor in California. Yes. He's been a great governor. And
took him a while.
It took him, about 40 years, but he has been. And he was asked that, and I don't know if he just doesn't smile a lot anymore, but he had this very straight thing, and he said, well, recreational use is fine. And I said, well, why don't we just have it freely and non-criminalized? And he looked and he said, well, we don't want a bunch of potheads running our government. And I think it was on Brett Baer, one of those things. And they, that was the takeaway. I don't know. We used to put people in jail for, when I was working for Governor Thompson in the U.S. Attorney's Office, for having suitcases of marijuana, and it's gone from that to where we are now. I don't know if it's medicinal use or otherwise. Quite honestly, given the context of all the other problems we have, I don't know and I don't care anymore. It's the least a thing that's important to me is whether we legalize it or not, tell you the truth.
Here's a question that underlies a lot of what we've been talking about, but we haven't asked directly, and we should, because it may be the most important economic issue of all. I mean, we are, as Rob said, a state that's wealthy, diverse, agribusiness, services, manufacturing, tourism, all the things that support our economy. We're in pretty good shape. The gross state product of Illinois is more than the product of Indiana, Wisconsin, and Iowa combined. So we have the resources. We have, even though it's in need of patching and repair, a great transportation system if it's run right. We've got the great universities. We've got the great cultural places in the state. And, are you listening, California? We have water right at our doorstep, and it's not going away. Not going to see many droughts, at least in the Chicago area. But are we in Illinois doing enough to educate our young citizens for the jobs of today and tomorrow? And if we are, how are we doing that? And if we're not, why aren't we doing that?
Well, my view, at least from an educational perspective as a member of the Board of Trustees of Elmhurst College, is one of concern. I understand that this is the first year we've spent more on Medicaid than we have on education. And our priority investment in education has always been one of the hallmarks of Illinois leadership. That concerns me as a matter of priority. And as was mentioned earlier, the breakdown of the family that contributes to the lack of students finishing public high school, especially in the city of Chicago, breeds all of the problems that the governor was just discussing in terms of unemployment, crime, et cetera. So I think that needs to be considered one of the major priorities of the leadership change in Springfield is finding ways to emphasize and prioritize the investment in education, because we're all getting along in years. We've had our educational experiences, and our futures are going to be dependent on the quality of education and leadership in the next generation. So I view that as a very, very important priority, and I'm concerned as a policy matter about whether that emphasis has changed. I don't take anything away from Medicaid. I'm about a year or so from being eligible for some of those things. But, we certainly want to be able to provide benefits for our aging population, but we've got to create a balance too with the next generation and their educational future.
Yeah, you know, I used to be and I still am, a major proponent of liberal arts colleges, four-year liberal arts colleges. I used to say, I wish every kid in America could have the opportunity to do that, to go to one. It may be time to take a look at the model for success, particularly for job success. What's happening right now in the city of Chicago, I think the Emanuel administration is doing, is something that I think is going to be watched nationally. The Commerce Secretary's gotten on board, and essentially for people who don't know about it, graduates of Chicago Public Schools are being encouraged to take another, I think it's a year, maybe up to 2 years, to go to city colleges, or what we normally call junior colleges, and specifically Harper College is the one that I had read about. And they are learning skills at the junior college level that will result in almost certain jobs upon completion of the training. These jobs have been, and these training programs have been endorsed by corporations, and these aren't manufacturing jobs or steel mill jobs. These are jobs where they're actually learning technology and digital era types of skills that are actually going to be useful to them. So not every kid is going to be able to afford four-year liberal arts college. Quite frankly, not every kid is cut out for college. But if these skills can be learned at the junior college level right after graduation, and we can change some of those unemployment numbers, particularly for a certain class of students that are problems for us in Chicago, I think that model has to be considered.
As someone who has lived through the ACT prep now, I feel like for the last 8 years, it is, getting your kid ready to go off to college, it finally dawns on me that you need to be focusing back in first and second and third grade on that math and science. The math and science is the great divider. So what you're talking about, this new model of Mayor Emanuel's of the STEM high schools, science, technology, engineering, math, that's the great divider. Science and math, if you're not in that upper level starting back in 6th grade, you will forever be trying to crawl your way up to get into the honors classes, the AP classes, to be recognized to get into those schools that you really want to go to. And that's just the way it is. High school's too late. You need it back in 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade.
We talked earlier about how 1/3 of Chicago kids don't finish high school, but about 8 out of 9, close to 90%, don't get a 4-year college degree. So even if they're high school graduates, they're not getting fully prepared. I think the city college example is really, really exciting. One of the best things I've heard out of the city, the idea of linking those businesses with those colleges, so the student goes in with something close to a promise that you're going to get an education that is going to serve you well. We did a project called the New Plan of Chicago that tried to point to the linkage of education and crime and employment. You're never going to fix your crime problem. Police are going to be outgunned as long as kids are not prepared to have gainful employment, and frankly, as long as one half of kids in Chicago are in single-parent families with all the economic pressures that entails. So you also have to keep in mind, you can fix your education system, but you got to have a 5-year-old that's ready for an education system.
Actually, Bruce is even younger than that. Some of the studies we did during the Thompson administration indicated that you really have to catch them from birth to 3. We talked a little bit about this last night, which is a really scary thought, particularly for some of the families that you mentioned. You know, birth to 3 is a little problematic.
If you were going to give state government in Illinois a grade, what would it be? A, C, F?
I'd give it a T for term limits.
All right.
If you're talking about, you know, the current governor and the leadership, I'd have to give it about a C minus.
I'd give it a D.
Yeah, I'd have to give it a D just because of how much interest it's costing us every day.
I prefer to be positive and give it an incomplete.
All right, now you're talking to a CEO who's deciding whether to bring a business to Illinois or keep a business in Illinois. What grade would you give to Illinois' assets? Rob?
I'd start with an A minus. I mean, I think we've got world-class facilities in all the areas you mentioned.
I agree. Me too. I agree.
Well, the infrastructure, though, I mean, yes, we do. It's a great location, and O'Hare's fabulous, but getting around and getting to where you want to go, I'd give it a B. I mean, I think we can do better.
I think A minus, B plus. Those natural assets are the reason that we're not Des Moines or St. Louis or Indianapolis. We have this great richness that we've had for many, many decades. We just got to make better use of it.
So somehow we have to connect political leadership, governmental leadership to promote and safeguard the assets that we have, and then maybe the composite grade would be a lot higher. Is that right?
I think so.
If we can get back to bringing fresh blood in. We've
Sure.
just gone through endorsements for the Illinois House and the Senate. There are 177 seats in the House and Senate. There are 33 or 34 actual races in this primary election. In every other race, they get a pass. Now you're going to go into November, and about half the seats will not be contested, and maybe half again will have a viable contest, and yet the money will all flow to those 20 to 25% of the seats that are contested. That's why we did flip on term limits and strongly support it now, and would like to see fair maps to get some competition in the legislature.
How about the money flow? Is it appropriate for public employee unions to contribute money to members of the legislature and the governor who fix the wages, salaries, and working conditions of the public employees? If you did that in the manufacturing business, for example, you'd be in the federal penitentiary, because that would be a federal crime for workers to band together to give money to their employers. And yet in Illinois and in most other states, maybe with some exception in Wisconsin, it's perfectly all right for public employees to band together in a union to raise money to contribute to the very people who will fix their salaries, their wages, and all the other costs of government. Is that right? Is that appropriate?
I think it is right and appropriate. I don't think you should take away people's opportunity to support the people they want.
Well, I wouldn't take away, or it's not been suggested to take away the right of an individual public employee to contribute to the legislature of his choice, but should the unions be allowed to come up with $700,000 to give to a legislator or a legislative leader?
Yeah, I wanted to. I still say that union members as opposed to union leadership or unions, I suppose. Each of us should be able to support the people we want, and I believe that firmly, and I don't back off that. I can tell you that the abuse that goes from what the governor's referring to in his question, I'll talk about two people very quickly that are getting beat up and focused on for the simple purpose that they had the audacity to vote for the pension reform bill. One is a young African-American legislator called Christian Mitchell. And Tony Preckwinkle called me about a year ago and said, you should meet Christian Mitchell and support him. And I said, well, who is he? And she says, well, he's running for the seat along the lakefront. I said, why would I want to support him? Is he a Republican? He says, no, he's a Democrat. Why would I want to support him? Because he's for pension reform. Christian came over. I tell you, watch that young man, and he's not a Republican for sure, but he's one of the most enlightened and smartest young legislators I've come across and learned in a long time. So what does he get? You just have to pull the clips and look. What does he get for his voting for pension reform, which he campaigned on and believed in, is Karen Lewis, that sweet, fine person that runs the Chicago Teachers Union, has formed a 527 PAC, and she's given hundreds of thousands of dollars to a woman that used to be her staffer to make sure that we set an example by running Christian Mitchell out of the General Assembly. The other person is Ron Sandak, who's in this room. And Ron has always been for pension reform and voted for it, but he's in a district that's a little bit maybe shaky in terms of reelection. And she's throwing all hundreds of thousands of dollars after him, the CTU, SEIU, AFSCME, IEA, IFT, the same group of people that were against it, because in Karen's deal, she knows what you've been talking about what's coming with the Chicago teachers. So I think that they should be able to do what they want. It's their money. We can't tell them what to do with it. I think the rest of us, though, don't have the right to object to it if we don't get behind candidates like Christian Mitchell or Ron Sandak, and I believe that heart and soul, because the public employees, they make up 5% of the people in this state. And yet, because of their pension issues, because once again, I want to draw a sharp distinction between public employees unions and the trades unions. The public employees, for 5%, have all their money be focused to do anything and defeat anybody or hurt anybody that's going to be contrary to their self-interest, and the hell with the rest of the state. And if we let that happen, it's our fault. But I still believe that they can contribute and support what they think is important in their lives.
Well, if I could pick up on that, there aren't many contested races in the primary, but where there are, more often than not, it's retribution for a gutsy vote on pension reform. And I would encourage you that when you vote, if you see that you have one of those local races, find out what's going on in the race, because that's usually the issue. And if a number of those lawmakers are plucked off in this primary, I think we're going to lose the real prospect of pension reform for Chicago and the Chicago schools.
When's the last time the Tribune published a front page editorial? Newspapers used to do that all the time. They don't do it now. Well, here's a perfect example. You want to save these two legislators that voted for something that was critical for the state of Illinois, in your opinion, put that editorial box on the front page.
We did a number of front page editorials on pension reform, and we also put all of our Plan of Chicago editorials out on the front page. And I think that's a great idea, and I'm going to go right back and suggest it before Election Day too.
There you go.
Yeah, pension reform would not have occurred even to keep the pressure in General Assembly without the Tribune and its leadership going back to the beginning, and that's just a fact. But I don't disagree with the governor's suggestion, Bruce. I mean, the front pages, because a lot of the people that we're talking to don't read the editorial pages. You got to get them on the front page.
Careful, Bruce is here.
My point of view on the question you asked was as to whether or not there should be limits on public entity lobbying of legislators. And as a former federal prosecutor, we used to say, follow the money. And quite frankly, it is very hard to resist the money, and it creates undue influence. I agree with Ty that every citizen should have a right to vote and support financially whatever point of view is being expressed and whatever candidates. But when you get to large sums of money from influential public interest groups, it skews the results, and it's not a level playing field. So I, for one...
I do have to bring up as well, we have a self-funder running right now, too. So really what this highlights is a need for campaign finance reform. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, come on. So if we're going to limit them, we got to also limit someone who can just write the
I don't
check.
disagree, but we've had so much finance reform in my lifetime in elections, I don't know what the right solution is. I'm not trying to belittle your suggestion, but if we look at it national or local, there's always a way around it. The 527 packs that have popped up are a way of... But just to underline the governor's question, the total amount contributed by public sector unions in the 2008 cycle was $6,894,000, all to state legislative races. In 2010, $11,826,499. Follow the money. In 2012, they stepped down. I guess they felt secure. $7,382,015, and that's all coming focused to either support people that support them without question, no matter what the issue is, or to crush those that don't. And that's why the rest of us have to get involved.
Lee promised at the beginning that he was going to get you out by 10 o'clock. I'm going to get you out a few minutes earlier, but not without saying thank you to our extraordinary panel. Great discussion, great viewpoints from smart people who care. And I think I could probably say the same thing about this audience. Thank you for coming. Great people, smart people, people who care. So I guess the real question is, can we carry the spirit of this kind of meeting into our everyday lives, out of this place, into the polling place, into supporting the candidates that you think are good candidates that will lead the state of Illinois in the direction that this state needs to go. Great hope in this state, great promise in this state, great assets in this state. We need to summon the will to harness all of that and make Illinois an extraordinary state. And it can be done. Thank you for coming.
Continued round of applause for Governor Thompson. Bruce Stoll, Mary Ann Ahern, Ty Fahner, Todd Miles, and Rob Kniffer. What a great, great panel.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.